I'm Megan Skidmore, and welcome to the Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I'm a woman, daughter, sister, spouse, mother, life coach, and person of faith on a mission to normalize asking questions and allowing doubts on a faith journey and all aspects of life. Join me as I bring this traditionally taboo topic out of the shadows of shame and into the light. I firmly believe we normalize through more talking and engaging in discussion. More talking peels back, exposes, and erases the layers of shame associated with asking questions and allowing doubts. When we are more authentic about our journey, we are more powerful because shame has no power in the face of authenticity. Hopeful Spaces is a Dallas Hope Charities component of Hopeful Discussions, sponsored by Mercedes-Benz Financial Services USA. It's a free monthly parent, ally, or caregiver support group facilitated by Megan Skidmore Coaching. Email chc@dallashopecharities.org for more info. First Friday's free coaching, the confidential group to bring all the questions, vent frustrations, share fears, express doubts. Navigating a new and uncertain reality is hard enough. Let's remove the worry of judgment from others. In this group, I will help you help yourself so that you can be there for your child, family, loved ones, and for you too. Click the link in the show notes to sign up. You must complete the agreement. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Shadow of Doubt. I have Michelle and Rachel Barnard-Crosland with me today. We were chit-chatting a little before I hit record, and I mentioned I'm a little nervous, and I don't know why that is. I'm usually not. I think your story is so beautiful, and you are such trailblazers, and I honor you for that. I thank you for that, and I just acknowledge that. This is a very unique and also sacred space. And so thank you for being willing to share your story on the podcast today. So welcome.
Thanks for having us.
So can we just take a minute and have you introduce yourselves? Tell us about your backgrounds, where you're from, where each of you grew up.
Yeah, maybe I can kick it off.
Yeah, sure.
So my name is Rachel. I grew up kind of all over the place. So I was born in Texas and I lived there until I was about 9. I moved to Virginia for about a year in 4th grade, and then I went to Hong Kong for 5 years. So from 10 to 15 years old, I was in Hong Kong. And then when my dad retired, which was the reason, the job opportunities were the reason we moved. So when he retired, they decided to settle down in Provo. So I finished up high school in Provo, Utah, and then decided that I would go to college at the University of Utah. After college, I had gotten married in college, probably my junior year, and we had moved out to California, and we were there for about, 9 or 10 years. We were eventually decided to get divorced, and when we decided to do that, we came back to Utah because there was various different family connections here, and as we prayed about it and thought, it just made the most sense. So that's a little bit about where I've been. When it comes to things like work, I've pursued a career since being outside of college. I currently work for Adobe, so I do basically software sales, more kind of from a technical lens, and help customers kind of understand what our software does so that they're more apt to buy it. I have, from my first marriage, one son. He's 5. And maybe, Michelle, I can let you go through your story, and then we'll talk about where it combines.
Yeah, sounds good.
Great.
I'm Michelle. I grew up in Provo, Utah, my whole life, born and raised. I went to BYU for college, studied mechanical engineering, and got married while I was at BYU and was pregnant upon graduation. So never worked in engineering. I jumped right into having babies and being a stay-at-home mom. And I have 4 kids from my first marriage. And I was a stay-at-home mom for about 11 years. And when I got divorced, kind of jumped into kind of the workforce for the first time. So that was an experience trying to get my feet back into that. And it was kind of difficult, but found my way. And I worked for Fidelity for a little while, and now I'm actually working at an elementary school here in Provo as a health clerk. So it's a great job. I can be on the same schedule as my kids, and it's been really good.
Amazing. Congrats. That is not easy, trying to reinvent yourself or find yourself again after not working. I know all about that. So
Yeah.
that's great. Thank you for sharing your background. You both were raised in the LDS faith then,
Hmm.
Yes,
and
that's a good point.
your families, your parents and grandparents, that
Yep.
kind of thing as well.
Yeah, my mom was a convert, but there's definitely multiple generations on my dad's side.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, very much kind of growing up was a pretty typical LDS family in all the ways that you would think about that. So I have a great family and great parents as well.
Yeah, same here. Grew up LDS in Provo and a fairly what you would call a typical LDS family. So
You all have siblings as well?
yeah, I'm the oldest of four.
Okay.
Um,
I'm the youngest of five,
the
so
youngest of five.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's great. So I invited you to come on. I had the privilege of hearing you both speak at the Gather Conference in Provo in September of 2024. And I was so touched by your story because it is not a common one, and you were willing to share it in front of a large group. And so I wondered if you might share it on my podcast, and you graciously said you would. So let's talk a little bit about when your stories merged, what that was like, and, you're obviously married. You've mentioned
yeah.
that the day that I heard you speak. So maybe if you can start there and speak to that.
Yeah, so we've been married for just over a year. So we got married last October, and now we're in November of the following year. So we just celebrated our first year anniversary. Michelle and I met via a support group for queer LDS women through Lift and Love, and got to know each other through that. I had some opportunities to come out to Utah for work, and so we got together with a group of people who were local, who were also in the support group. And I very quickly fell in love with Michelle. It's pretty much immediate for me. I was really drawn to her in all the ways. A significant one is an emotional and kind of spiritual pull to her. And it was very clear to me very quickly that she was, going to be an important part of my life. And at that time, I didn't know necessarily what that meant or where that would go or how we would help each other. But fast forward, we got married and are have blended our families and are pursuing life together and growth together and all the things. So Michelle, I don't know if you would add or say anything else.
No, I think that pretty much, that's the short version of the story. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
that pretty well covers how we met and fell in love.
Okay, so you've been married just shy of a year, not quite a year,
Just over.
Just over a year.
just
Yeah.
over a year. I misheard that. Thank you for clarifying. One of my goals is to normalize faith journeys on my podcast here, to actually celebrate how different each of them are. I really appreciated, Rachel, that you said I connected with Michelle. Both there was this emotional connection and spiritual, and you just knew that somehow she would be a part of your life. You didn't know exactly what that looked like. You felt that connection. When you're raised in the LDS church, we're taught about the Spirit and how the Spirit can move us. In other faiths, it's, called different things. It's that those whisperings that we feel that come from deep within that help us to, kind of guide us along on our path. And I love that you brought that up, because I think all too often the assumption, if somebody is acknowledging this queer side of their life, their person, their being, that couldn't have been something that was led or okayed or guided by a higher power, by God, by a divine being. And so I would love to hear a little bit more of your story. Like, I'm guessing there was some questioning, maybe some doubts. Like, when did you know that how you identified, and that because you both got married initially in in a hetero facing, heteronormative marriage, I guess you both have kids from that. Can you share a little bit about that part of your journey? There's several intersections there.
Yeah.
Queer identity or spirituality, you know, just if you can share a little bit about that.
Totally.
I can jump into that first if
Good.
that's okay.
Yeah.
So growing up, for me, I'm a very social person. I loved being, with friends and doing all the, normal things that my friends were doing. So I think, I liked boys. I had boyfriends in high school, and it was all just sort of part of the normal kind of dating teen experience and getting to know people. I definitely felt a draw towards girls. I mean, I had a lot of like girlfriends that I guess at the time I would say I was obsessed with, or I just, just
Okay.
really drawn to. But, being raised in a very, you're swimming in heteronormativity constantly. So there's just not much room to question and to really, explore that
Can you
part.
just take a minute and just share what you mean? I know what you mean when you say you were swimming in heteronormativity. Can you just take a few sentences and share what you mean by that for those that may not
Yeah, I mean,
understand?
it's becoming more acceptable to talk about queer
Hmm.
relationships or the LGBTQ community. But when I was growing up, gay was kind of a slander word, and it wasn't talked about in any kind of like normalized way. It was just this bad thing that was taboo to talk about. And so,
Yeah.
life is all about, men marrying women. That's just and gendered, everything's gendered, men are this way, women are this way. And,
Yeah.
it's the classic boy meets girl story.
Hmm.
That's what all of our society is built on. And so
Yeah.
there was just there was no room to really think outside of that box at all. Um,
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
yeah. So when I first realized that I was attracted to women was my freshman year of college. At BYU, I fell in love with a roommate. And, at first she was just this girl that I just completely admired, and we got to be
Hmm.
best friends. But pretty soon, I felt so differently about her than I'd ever felt about, any guy that I'd ever dated. I would rush home from dates so I could spend time with her and wanted to be close to her in all the ways. I just and, so when I started like, oh, I just really want to like hold her hand, or just had these yearnings to be closer, that was it was very
Hmm.
obvious to me that I felt differently about her,
Hmm.
and something that I couldn't deny at the time. And it was really confusing because the way I felt towards her felt so right and so good and so pure, honestly. I just wanted to, I was finding little ways to make her day better, to serve
Hmm.
her, to help her in any way that I could. And so it was confusing because I had grown up learning about right and wrong and feeling the difference when you've made a mistake and how
Hmm.
that feels, and just that level of discernment. And I also had been taught, homosexuality is a sin, and those types of feelings aren't right. They're not from God. So I had this disconnect between what I'd been
Yeah.
taught and what I was feeling. And so I really tried to kind of dissect the way I felt about her. I remember just writing and writing, in my journal about this, and just trying to figure out why it felt okay and even good and wholesome to love her the way that I did,
Hmm.
and then try to pull out the pieces that like weren't good. I'm like, if I could just pull it apart, then I could figure out how to, be friends and not have it be more than friends. If I could just figure
Hmm.
out how to, unravel this love that I have and separate the good love from the bad love, then I'd be okay. But of course, there's no doing that. Like it just builds upon itself, and you can't really unravel it. So it was a confusing time, but I think also a time where my faith or my paradigm started to shift, because I trusted that feeling that, you know, I felt okay. That this didn't feel bad. It didn't feel wrong,
Yeah.
but it felt like an impediment to my spiritual progress, because I knew, like, if I wanted to get married in a temple and have an eternal family, I couldn't make that choice. I couldn't go down that road. And so it was kind of clear to me at that point, like, well, this doesn't feel wrong, but I also know that I can't progress spiritually if I choose that. And so I dove into, not that I mean, I've always taken the gospel very seriously, but I just kind of doubled down on all the gospel things
Yeah.
and served a mission, started dating as much as I could, started dating men when I got home, and pretty quickly found a guy that, kind of matched up on paper, and I knew I didn't feel about him the same way I'd felt about her. The type of love felt very different, but in
Hmm.
my head I just justified it, well, this is good enough, and Christ is going to compensate for all the lack here, because this is what I'm supposed to
Hmm.
do. This is the righteous thing to do and the right thing to do. And so, it jumped into my first marriage, and
Yeah.
quickly kind of started filling the void with children and hobbies and just kept busy as I could because,
Mm-hmm.
there was that lack there that was really hard to compensate for.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's really personal.
But I think my story is slightly different in that I would say I was just deeply, deeply in denial. I think it was very clear to me the path that was gonna, that I understood was gonna lead to happiness and eternal life and success and all the things that I needed was laid out before me. It was, you get married to a man, you have a family, you grow together in that relationship, you nurture children, etc. Like that was my whole existence was to be a mother in that frame. I think that was very like just the viewpoint on life that I had from a pretty young age. And so I pursued that and I didn't question that. And I had lots of experiences looking back that anybody would look at and say that, you have feelings towards girls, like that this is different with girls than it is with boys, but it didn't matter to like that wasn't even something that I would consider because it was so impossible of a situation when you feel like your whole, eternal happiness and the eternal happiness of everyone around you is dependent on you making certain choices. There's no other option. So I think I just over the years I got to a point where I couldn't deny that I was having the experiences that I was having, the feelings, the thoughts, the yearning, the different things. And while I had those over the years, when they would kind of peak up for me, I was quick to justify that as not something that was coming within me, but something that was happening to me. So whatever you want to call it, Satan or some bad spirit was doing something to me that was making me think and feel things that were going to take me off the path, is what I thought, which sounds so sad and devastating to say that out loud and know that I used to be in that spot, but I was. And so at a certain point, I had to kind of face my reality. And for me, I was, deep into a marriage and to a man and had a son, but had to quickly face and make choices, right? I had to weigh and discern what was the right thing to do moving forward. And so that was a very difficult process. And there's a lot of grief associated with that, even to this day. But yeah, I think that's kind of my story in a nutshell of coming out and how I went so long without really understanding this really big piece of myself. So
this is so beautiful. I just want to acknowledge, I know this isn't easy to share, and I know it's tender, and I know it's so personal, and I thank you again for sharing. And I hear you. There's still some grief, even though you did move forward. I hear you. So I find myself and possibly those listening, that's I'm sure it wasn't a jump. I'm sure it was a bridge between where you were then to where you're at now. You were sad. You said you were so sad and devastating to think about some of those beliefs that you held and truly believed and how they affected you. How do you get from there to here? Like, in what role did allowing questions and allowing the doubts, like maybe they motivated you, maybe they were a catalyst. Can you speak to that, how that worked for you?
Yeah, definitely. There's quite a bit that I could probably speak to on that subject. It definitely was a gradual process, and there was a lot to learn and a lot of things to take time and sit with over the years to be able to get to that point, even unrelated to specifically thinking about, being queer and what does that mean for me moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
So when in my first marriage, I fairly quickly, I was pursuing the path that I thought, and part of that was to have kids, and have a family. So pretty quick into that marriage, we started the process of trying to have children, and was met with infertility, basically undiagnosed infertility. And that process of trying to do something that I really was dead sure that God wanted me to do and was really like my existence, like why I was here. Sorry, this is still emotional to this day.
It's
but
okay. Tears are okay.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Having that not work for me in the way that I thought it was going to was a big kind of paradigm shift for me.
Mhm.
And learning to wait on God's timing was an important lesson that I think I learned looking back on that. And being able to sit in uncertainty and move forward and progress and develop a deeper relationship with my Savior during that process was, I think, really foundational to what I was going to experience later, kind of coming to terms with things. So that's one area where kind of things shifted for me to say, okay, there's not an exact path that I understand, and what's God's will for me is different than what I'm understanding it to be in this moment. That was kind of a pivotal moment. I would say there was another bigger pivotal moment for me was actually during kind of the COVID and when Black Lives Matter was really a big topic of conversation. I was spending a lot of time kind of digging into the racism that exists in our country today and kind of why it's there and how it still is perpetrating even today when I think a lot of people have no intentions of being racist. Anyway, I took a hard look at myself based off of the things that I was reading to try and understand like my role in that, when I would have for a long time would have just said, well, that's not me. I'm certainly not racist. It's this problem that I can acknowledge exists, but I don't really need to spend time with it because that's not me. And I think pausing to really dig into that and understand, yeah, actually, the water that you've been drinking and the air that you've been breathing your whole life has had racism in it, and it's in you as well. And it's something that I realized that I needed to kind of confront, and that was extremely humbling for me. I like one of the more humbling moments of my life was to say, I'm actually, unknowingly, unintentionally a part of this bigger kind of societal problem. Again, sorry for being emotional.
Never apologize. It's 100% okay. Tears are welcome.
So in kind of doing that and exploring that and being more self-reflective, all I can say that I was just deeply humbled and understood that I had this view of reality that was actually different than what was actually reality. And I was really deeply wrong about certain things that I had no idea that I was. And so
so you're talking specifically about racism in this case?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I basically fell to my knees and, was just kind of overcome by this and asked the most sincere question I think I ever have in prayer, which was, what else am I wrong about? Because I understood that I could exist not knowing that I was really wrong about certain things. And I think that really was another pivotal point. And from that point forward, I had lots of different experiences that took a long time, but piece by piece started to piece together, coming to a better understanding of my own identity and being queer. And anyway, that was just another kind of key moment of a shift and being able to recognize that I didn't know everything. I wasn't right about everything. There wasn't this gold standard checkbox list that I just needed to march down, but the things were much more nuanced, things were much more complicated. And, I needed God's help to navigate that and understand where I needed to grow.
Instead of setting New Year's resolutions, I invite you to create vision. Decide what you want, choose what to keep and what to release. Listen to your inner wisdom and then create. Cultivate your mood for 2025. In 1 hour, we will create a digital mood board, kind of like a vision board. It's an opportunity for you to focus on not so much what you do, but instead who you are and who you want to be. Choose to see 2024 for all of the gifts, lessons, and insights it offered. And now choose the mood or the tone you want to cultivate for Set the Mood 2025. Link is in the show notes. If you're not available to join live, please register. All who do will receive a copy of the replay. Go to paperbell.me/Megan-Skidmore. Thank you so much. That's a beautiful, heartfelt prayer. What else am I wrong about? I'm in awe of the courage, the bravery, the love, the teachability, and the humility in a prayer of that nature. Thank you. Anything that you would add to that, Michelle?
I think for me, it was certainly that kind of first experience in college that just feeling that difference, just opened my mind to the fact that my experiences and my personal revelation about something might differ than what I'm hearing from church leaders sometimes. And that was kind of an eye-opening moment. And another one was on my mission and I served a mission in Nicaragua. It was a really great experience in so many ways, but it was also difficult because sometimes I felt like I was being asked to do things that didn't feel right to me in terms of, pushing people, those that I was teaching to get baptized before I felt like they might be ready, or, just kind of pushing things that the Spirit felt like wasn't right to me. And I had, mission leaders, missionary leaders, and even mission presidents that I felt like were insisting that I act a certain way, or that I, push people in a certain way that just didn't feel consistent with what I was feeling from the Spirit. So that was another time where it was kind of confusing, but I kind of realized like I need to stick with how I know the Lord's talking to me, despite what other people are saying. Because if that feels wrong and what I'm feeling is right, like I need to be able to trust, the direct source. The inspiration that I'm getting from my Heavenly Father and the Spirit on things feels very important to follow. And so that was kind of another time in my life where I felt and just kind of strengthened that confidence in my own ability to receive revelation and in my relationship with Heavenly Father. So, that's something that's been really important to me and key, I think, in my whole journey. As throughout the years, I've questioned things here and there, or had wondered about certain things, and I've always been kind of that way. And I credit my mom a lot for this. She's a thinking kind of person as well. Doesn't take things at face value, but allowed us to have questions and discuss things, which I really appreciated growing up. But I think, when I was younger in high school and things, I was very confident that every answer could be found in the scriptures or in conference talks, or, and so if I had a question about something, I would just dive straight in, and I would just, with all the enthusiasm and faith in the world, go seek out my answer. And a lot of those, more simple or primary answers sufficed at that age. Even with the bigger life questions, without some hard life experiences under my belt, it was easy to just accept, okay, this is the answer to that, and, done deal. That makes sense to me. I'm going to move on. But as life went on, the questions got harder and had some difficult experiences to back them up. And so that became, in terms of my orientation, I think I got to a point where I just couldn't ignore it anymore. It became something that was so difficult to to reconcile and to live with, that I couldn't just push it under the rug or ignore it or look past it. Like I had to deal with it. It was uncomfortable to look at it, but it was more uncomfortable to not. And so, it got to that kind of tipping point that was like, something has to be done here. And if I don't, take this to the Lord, then like, it's just going to consume me. And so, then I had to really dive in.
Yeah, you both have mentioned how you've been able to differentiate yourselves as an individual with your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own inspiration, your own messages coming through for you, even though they were different than whatever external source, maybe what your family of origin taught, what your teachers at church taught, what the leaders of the church have said. How did you give yourself permission to do that? It's one thing to hear those messages, but to follow through and act on them, make choices, like that's a big deal.
I think that having grown up in the church, I'll speak for myself. I had lots of opportunities to learn about what the Spirit feels like. And I had lots of opportunities to receive my own personal revelation about things and kind of try things out, right? As I grew into as an adult, various different life experiences, whether it was feeling prompted that I needed to move and doing it and seeing the success of that, you know, or feeling like I shouldn't do something, and then time fast forwards and you kind of understand why. And just these faith building experiences, having interacted with the Spirit, having pursued a relationship with the Spirit, you know, even callings at church, you know, learning to teach by the Spirit, those different things. There's just lots of opportunities to develop, I don't know if you would want to call it a skill set, but, you know, a relationship with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, and being able to understand what the Spirit feels like, as well as to follow it, to not follow it, and see what those various different outcomes are. So I think by the time that I was, and you kind of talked about giving yourself permission, and I think a lot of what Michelle was saying I would resonate with is there came a point where I wasn't really giving myself permission. Like I had to deal with it. The internal conflict was so severe and impacting my mental health and just like my ability to be present, and all the different things was so intense that there was no other choice than to reconcile it and to take it to God and to do these things. So throughout that process, which, you know, slow and step by step, I do feel like I did get various different pieces of personal revelation that would take me to that next step or to that next thing. And there's nothing to do, I guess, than to trust it and to trust the past experiences that I've, you know, ultimately had with the Spirit to say, I know this is the Spirit talking to me. This situation that I find myself in feels impossible, but based on my past experience and the faith that I have in my Savior and the relationship that I have with Him, like I have to take these steps forward that I feel like I'm being prompted to do. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, for me, very similar. I credit all of this to just my upbringing in the church. I mean, I was taught from such a young age that I have heavenly parents who are invested in me, who speak to me personally, and that I can have a personal relationship with them. I mean, some of the most beautiful teachings of our church is our individual relationship with our heavenly parents and that individual guidance that they want to give us. And I grew up learning that and trusting that and believing that it was true. And it's, you know, for me, over and over again in my life has panned out that way. I've offered up prayers about specific things and gotten personal guidance. And so I just knew that process worked because I've done it over and over again. And, you know, it breeds a confidence in yourself and in your own feelings and your own spiritual impressions, because I've just practiced what I've learned for so many years, you know. And sometimes people think it's strange that we're still going to church when, you know, the church can sometimes not be a very friendly place to the LGBTQ community. And it is really difficult. But some of the most core parts of my belief system and my, you know, moral compass and my relationship with God and my Savior have come from the teachings of the church and my upbringing in the church. And those things are so precious to me. And those things are the very things that have led me to where I am. And so, you know, you don't just walk away from that. I mean, I couldn't. And I know some people can and need to out of necessity. And I would never, you know, diminish anyone else's journey that's led them away from the church, because I think those are completely valid as well, and sometimes the best thing for people. But, you know, the ability to just trust in my own revelations from the Spirit and from God just came from, you know, a lifetime of having those experiences and growing up being taught that my whole life, that God was interested in me personally, individually, and He wanted to talk to me. And so
you both had individual relationships with the divine that you had spent time cultivating, and you knew that language, so to speak, and that those patterns, and you knew them well enough that it was pretty much undeniable for you when you felt God speaking to you.
one other thing, if I can add one more
Yeah.
kind of part of this for me, was for a long time, I didn't know anybody else who felt like me, who was attracted to women, you know, and was trying to be LDS. I felt very isolated and alone because I just didn't know anyone else that was going through similar struggles that I was going through. And, you know, once I met one person, you know, and we shared that common thing, and it was just so, you know, soul expanding to talk to someone else that had a similar experience. And then I met more and more and more people, and listening to their stories and resonating with them and hearing the faith that they had was also something that was so helpful, because, you know, listening to someone's testimony about being true to their LGBTQ identity, which is contrary to, you know, beliefs that I had grown up having, but feeling the Spirit as I listened to them tell their story, and having the Spirit confirm to me truth that they were speaking, you know,
Yeah.
it was a really powerful, you know, experience as I got to know more and more people in this space, and listened to their stories and heard them speak of God and their relationship with the divine as well. And just, you know, really having the Spirit confirm to me that, you know, they were seeking truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would just echo what Michelle was just saying, that a huge part of the shift for me was listening to other people's experiences and stories, and specifically testimonies within the context of um, people coming to terms and accepting and celebrating this big part of their identity, their queerness,
Mm-hmm.
and their stories that they share about their interactions with God and the Spirit and Jesus Christ. And that was a huge piece of my shift as well, was to be able to hear other people's testimonies, and just like Michelle said, feel the Spirit that I've been feeling my whole life, had all these different opportunities to practice that, confirm to me that what they're saying is true. And if it's true for them, it's also true for me. That was a big part of my shift.
I appreciate you both giving more insight into that process for you. It can be initially very, it's hard if what you absolutely know to your core is going on for you, the thoughts, the feelings, and you've got this conflict between two things. That's how it was for me when I learned about my kiddo's identity as a queer kiddo. It was really, really hard to reconcile what I had been raised with versus what I was experiencing as their parent. And so I just thank you for sharing that. And I hope that those that are listening can feel empowered and feel that they're not alone if they're having a similar experience and similar feelings. I want to go back to something, I believe it was you, Michelle, that said some people wonder why or how we can continue to actively participate in the LDS Church. I'd like to, if you can, if we can speak to this part of your journey. You know, how has it been navigating this, you know, the questions and doubts that you've had, but really on a bigger scale, you know, navigating within the various communities of which you're a part, your, not just your faith community, but your families, you know, maybe even your work, your employment, and you know, what that has been like, you know, because often the safety, it could be there, but a lot of times it's not. One of you said earlier how we just didn't talk about these things in the 90s and even 2000s, the early 2000s so much. It's more in recent years that there's more talk around it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There's, you know, where to start. It can be really tricky to navigate relationships when there are widely varying beliefs, and there's a lot of fear that, you know, is usually the initial reaction to things. And I think that was the case for my family. I came out to them maybe a year before I told them I was getting divorced. And when I first came out, it was kind of this, hey, don't worry, nothing's changing, but I just want you to know this about me, you know, because I longed to be known. And as I was discovering things and going through the journey myself, I wanted to bring, you know, my family along. But also, it's hard to, you kind of want a certain outcome. And so you sort of project that outcome, and that's what you choose to share. You kind of hide the other more difficult things. And so when I told them I was getting divorced about a year later, that was a very, very hard conversation with my parents and also with my siblings. And there was a lot of fear there. And I'm sure it was multifaceted fear, you know, one of just like, what are you going to do if you get divorced, and you know, what are your kids going to do, and how are they going to cope?
Yeah.
And, you know, just for, that type of fear, but also, of course, there's probably that eternal fear as well. Like what are
Right.
you doing with,
Right.
you know, your eternal salvation? Why are you
Right.
messing with that?
How could you do this? Yeah.
Um, and so there was some of those thoughts expressed, and I think what honestly I look at it, I think that God gave me a gift in that time to have grace and hold space for them. I knew it was
Hmm.
important for them to be able to express their
Okay.
fears and those feelings. And I also knew that my relationship with them was vital to me. And so
Mm.
I, you know, I continued to have open conversations and to talk through things and to validate their fears as much as I could and, even be, humble in some of the things that they were saying and then just keep those conversations open. And I think we all chose to love each other over
Mhm.
our belief systems or our fears, and it's blossomed, and the fruits of that have been really wonderful. We have a really great relationship with both of our families, I would say, and they were all at our wedding, and and that took, I think, time for people to get comfortable. But again, it took all of us choosing to love each other and to prioritize our relationships with each other over
Mhm.
some hurt or fear that we were experiencing. Anything you'd add to that, Rach?
I think that's great.
Thank you for sharing that. I am genuinely happy for you that you have good relationships on both sides, good connections there. I was going to ask, what advice you would offer to those that find themselves in this place, but I think what you just kind of wrapped up with is to choose love over belief systems and over your fears. And you expressed, indirectly a strong value for you as your family, and their relationship was vital to you. And I can't imagine the courage it took to bring them in to your world and what was going on for you. I think, though, that's the first step to creating these safer spaces because they don't automatically exist. Somebody has to be the brave one to step into it and share. And again, every situation's different, and your situation may not be safe to share, and only you can decide and know and feel of that. Um, I I just wanted to ask, you've shared so many things. There's more that we could talk about, I'm sure, but I don't want to keep you longer. If you could share, if there was something you wanted those that are listening to understand, what are the pain points for you about navigating this space between your identity and also a person of faith, a person who still, values that relationship with God, that relationship with community, and so on.
A really excellent question. Michelle, do you have initial ideas or you want me to go first?
Um, well, my initial ideas, I guess, the first thing that came to my mind is I don't feel a conflict between being a disciple of Christ and being married to Rachel. It's there's no internal like feeling of, oh, I'm doing something wrong and this conflicts with my identity as a child of God and as a disciple of Christ. There's not a conflict there for me. And I guess the pain point is that there is a conflict there for a lot of other people. And I was recently listening to Charlie Bird and Ben Shalati talk about their conference experiences on their podcast. And it was really interesting
Mhm.
to me, their different takes and experiences. And,
Yeah, I
Charlie
heard
seemed to
that.
be saying a lot, why do you care what other people think? You got to get to a point where what other people think don't matter to you. And I think Ben finally got to saying, he's like, but these are apostles and prophets. They're the leaders of our church. So, what they're teaching over the pulpit, it does matter, and it is painful, and it does cause some, yeah, some pain and
Mhm.
some conflict. So I think, and just briefly mentioning, our local experience with the church has been really great. We have a very kind and loving ward, and generally we feel wanted and accepted there, you know,
Mhm.
despite the limitations that we have in
Mhm.
participating. But, it's still a pain point that it's, preached from the pulpit and from the leaders of the church that we are, living in sin, or that we're wrong, or, and that we're restricted because of these things, when internally there's no conflict there.
Yeah.
And so that, I think that's one thing that's difficult.
kudos to you for really leaning into that intuition and that inner voice. Yeah.
Yeah. I think when it comes to church participation, we both have really kind of deep testimonies and very personal relationships with our Savior. And we learned those things within the church, right? Like that was the kind of the
Mm-hmm.
foundation for building those relationships. And so we live in a nuanced space where we're just trying to navigate the complexities of living both as true to ourselves and to our experience and to what feels good and right and holy to us. And so there's a lot. I think if just anybody was listening, what would I want them to understand is like maybe just how much accompanying grief there is in this process. Like it's incredibly hard
Mm-hmm.
to, not have a temple recommend anymore, or just not even have um, just initial expectations for how life would go, like work, right? Like it's one of the hardest things for me is splitting time with my son. Like that was never the intention. But sorry. Um, that's part of the reality, right? This is a really challenging space, and grace and love and not passing judgment would go a long way in making that a little bit easier.
I thank you so much, Rachel. I feel that grief. You did mention that toward the beginning of our call, so thank you for graciously sharing that piece with us. I feel that. I feel that pain. And my heart goes out to you for that. It's a very I keep saying brave and courageous, and that just doesn't seem sufficient to describe this. But I truly hope this episode, this podcast, in some small ways, contributes to having the harder conversations, to normalizing someone else's journey isn't going to look like yours, and love can still be a main ingredient there, and judgment can, be taken out of the mix. Just to finish with one last question, I like to ask my guests, I call this beyond the shadow of doubt. Part of my journey was realizing how much shame and confusion and anxiety was coming up when I had these doubts that were causing this great cognitive dissonance. And so I dropped the A because I'm trying to kind of loosen the grip, the kind of the negative framework around doubt, the shame that's associated with it. So my question is, what does it mean to you to live beyond the shadow of doubt?
I think for me, to live beyond the shadow of doubt, goes back to trusting that we have heavenly parents in charge. And there's always going to be doubts. Life is messy, and like Rachel said, we live in a very nuanced and difficult space. So we don't know how it's all going to work out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know why it feels right for us to be married to each other and to be learning and growing and living this life together, and why the church teaches that it's, that's not the right way to live. I can't answer those questions. And so I think living beyond the shadow of doubt for me is just kind of getting comfortable in that gray area and putting all the trust in loving parents who I know have my best interest and who I know are guiding me, and letting that be enough.
That's beautiful.
I would
Anything you want
echo
to?
No, I would just echo that same sentiment. I I kind of what I was talking about earlier in my experience with infertility, just really learned that, you know, uh, God is at the helm, and that I can trust in his timing. And I have a lot of hope for the future. I have a lot of hope based on how I see people, jump into the boat with us, and grab, their figurative buckets and start, sometimes it feels like it's a sinking boat, but
Mm-hmm.
other people jump in and they grab buckets and they're pouring water out with us, and they're not just leaving us in the boat to sink. I think a lot of just watching people adapt and change and consider things that they hadn't before gives me a lot of hope for the future, and I can kind of trust in that process, and that it's a slow process, but a process nonetheless.
That's a great imagery. I'm going to remember that. That's awesome. I love this conversation. I thank you deeply. I like to throw a little levity in here because these topics do get a little heavy. I just have a few questions looking for 1 or 2 word answers just for our listeners to get to know you a little bit. Tell us your favorite book or a favorite book.
That's a question for Michelle. She's the reader.
Okay.
Oh gosh. I do. I like to read a lot, but I haven't read so much lately. Let's see, a favorite book.
I'm a bad influence, I guess.
I think my favorite book I would say is East of Eden by John Steinbeck.
Awesome. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm an introvert through and through.
And so that
Really?
would make me an extrovert because
Okay.
introverts and extroverts can get together, it seems like. But yeah, definitely an extrovert for
Great.
me.
And who is your favorite artist?
Do you have one, Rach?
Good question. I feel like I should have something really top of mind, and I don't. I really love music. So when you say artists, like I'm sure you're talking about a lot of different things, but I think
Whichever.
about musical artists.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's great.
I'm trying to think who could I narrow it down to though? That's tricky.
You don't have to.
Um, how about I narrow it down to a genre? I really love electronic music, and so there's lots of subgenres within that. But that's typically if I have some time to listen to music, I'll go that direction most often. So
Awesome.
I really love the local artist Brian Kerchiznik. And
Okay.
also my sister is an artist, and I have always looked up to and admired her and her work. Her name is Paige Anderson, so she's also kind of a local Utah artist, but
Sweet.
she has
I'll
some
have to look her up.
beautiful things. Yeah.
Okay. And are you a night owl or a morning lark?
I just like to sleep, man.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you.
Like go to bed early and wake up when it feels good.
I think I typically am more productive in the morning. So I would say I'd rather get to bed early and wake up and tackle the day.
And who is your celebrity crush?
Who's the celebrity crush? I feel like there's plenty, but I can't think of anybody right now. Maybe Michelle would know mine.
Um,
Um,
I got you on the spot, I guess.
Again, you tend to like the music artists,
yeah,
I
yeah.
would say. Recently, we've been watching some Marvel movies.
Oh,
We
yeah.
watched Agatha All
Aubrey
Along,
Plaza. Yeah.
and
Aubrey Plaza for sure.
There
and
you go.
yeah, and I've been thinking that Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda has been very pretty lately too. So
Awesome. And do you do still or carbonated water, or are you guys diet soda fans?
Diet soda, Diet Dr. Pepper, way too much of it.
There you go.
yep, same.
Same. And then finally, the furthest place that you've traveled.
I guess for me, that would probably be Australia, which is a great trip. Recommend it for anybody.
Okay. We'll take that.
Probably Ukraine for me.
Awesome. So if you're okay with it, if folks have questions for you or want to reach out, we can leave your social media handles in the show note.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, thank you again so much for being the brave souls that you are, for following your hearts and doing the hard things and creating more safety and more love.
Thank you.
Thanks for creating a space for us to share.
Beyond the Shadow of Doubt podcast is a proud member of the Dialogue Podcast Network, which is part of the Dialogue Journal found at dialoguejournal.com. Founder Eugene England was a Mormon writer, teacher, and scholar who wrote, "My faith encourages my curiosity and awe. It thrusts me out into relationship with all creation and encourages me to enter into dialogue. My hope is that this podcast is an extension of that vision." Visit meganskidmorecoaching.com to find this podcast and additional free resources, including the link for a complimentary coaching session. Follow me on Facebook or Instagram for more, or to send me a DM. Help the podcast grow. Please follow, review, and share with a friend.